Hey Alex Army, and welcome back to part 2 of this free Bratting Masterclass. And as we discussed in part 1, the principles we'll cover in this series all rest on the same framework. And as you can see, this framework has 4 distinct parts: style, goal, method, and result. Today we'll contrast the first 3 positive bratting styles with 3 dark and destructive manifestations. But remember the key point I presented last week. The ultimate desired result never changes. And that's what, for my note takers? An increased power gap. Regardless of the style, motivation, or method, the unspoken or unacknowledged desire behind it all is to experience a deeper and more intense power gap between dominant and submissive. Each style simply adds a unique nuance to this objective. So, what are the 3 dark and destructive styles we're discussing today? Testing, misplaced advocacy, and topping from the bottom. Now, testing includes often unspoken tests of the dominant to verify merit and safety. Misplaced advocacy often shows up in this context with hints, backhanded comments, complaining, or passive-aggressive acts to convey displeasure. And topping from the bottom involves undercutting or undermining the dominant or taking control of the interactions, scene, or dynamic. But remember the point we made a minute ago? All forms or styles of bratting have the same ultimate desired outcome: an increased power gap, even in these destructive examples. In other words, these 3 toxic styles are attempts to satiate fear, depression, and discouragement. Bratting is simply the tool to get relief from those feelings. That's why I said in part 1 that in the realm of brat taming or brat handling, it's not about addressing the what. It's not about what's going on the surface level. It's about addressing the why. But I know this can be so confusing and challenging to figure out when you're right there in it, right? This is where my dominant coaching clients will ask me how they can know for sure what their subtype is trying to accomplish and how to handle it appropriately. Because if not, and I'm sure you've run into this, things can go bad fast. So if that's you, you don't want to miss my new Brat Taming bundle on Patreon, which includes 3 epic new resources. And I say epic because I've created a bratting decision tree to help you dominants figure out what in the world is going on in your dynamic and how to solve it. It has 15 possible outcomes with 45 decision points. Basically, the next best thing to having me in your ear to help you make sense of what's going on in your dynamic. I also have my brand new Bratting Methodology chart, which uses the framework in this series to illustrate practical scenarios with examples of how to effectively determine what bratting is taking place and what to do about it. And I also have my Bratting Boundaries worksheet for dominance. And this worksheet is going to help you figure out exactly what your limits are for yourself, for your submissive, and for your dynamic so you can handle or tame your brat effectively. Just go over to patreon.com/LXerotica to get instant access to this incredible new bundle. So let's get back to this framework. If testing is about verifying the dominant's merit and the submissive's safety, the motivation for doing so is really about surrender. The subtype wants to fully surrender. They want to get out of their head. They want to bliss out, but they can't do this if they doubt 1, the dominant's capabilities, and or 2, their safety under the dominant's leadership. All right, so that's where this testing comes in. It's fear-based. But that's not the only option here. If this misplaced self-advocacy includes hinting, using backhanded comments, complaining, or engaging in passive-aggressive acts to convey displeasure, the motivation for doing so is a misplaced attempt to obtain often unspoken desires and relational needs. we're not appropriately advocating for our needs. We're not appropriately advocating for ourselves. We're not keeping the lines of communication open. We're scared to communicate. We're scared to actually self-advocate in a healthy way. So what do? We go subtle, backhanded, passive-aggressive in a very, very toxic way. But our final option here could be topping from the bottom. And this includes undercutting or undermining the dominant or taking control of the interactions, scene, or dynamic as the subtype here. And the motivation for doing so, as odd as it may sound on the surface, I truly believe it's an attempt to express an unfulfilled desire for leadership. This is an unfulfilled desire for leadership, correction, or guidance. That's the power gap that we're after here. So what can these motivations and methods tell us about how to increase the power gap in each of these scenarios? Well, just as I said in part 1, dominance, this is your time to critically think. And that's why I put together that Bratting boundaries worksheet for you to really help you do so if you're getting hung up on this. But for our purposes in this video, if your subtype is testing you in order to verify your merit and their own personal level of safety, how can you increase the power gap to soothe that fear? If your subtype is trying to get their unspoken desires met, how can you increase the power gap in order to supply the deficiencies they sense and experience to alleviate their depression? And if your subtype is taking control out of an unfulfilled desire for leadership, how could you increase the power gap and step it up as a leader in the ways that they need? Do you see how the why behind the what determines the how? Motivation makes all the difference here. So again, if you're having trouble with some of these critical thinking questions or just want the cheat sheets that I've already made for you, check out my new Brat Taming bundle on Patreon with these amazing new resources. So LX Army, thanks so much for tuning in today, and I hope you found this content helpful. If so, be sure to like, subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, and share this video with a friend who could benefit from this wisdom. And make sure you have those notifications turned on so you won't miss next week's video where I'm breaking down the vast differences between brat taming and brat handling and what they each mean for you and your dynamic.